So-
We're getting back. Okay.
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 Okay,
Okay, we're
Alicia,
back.
take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone, again. Technical problem solved. I will try to go back to where I was. So, as I mentioned, Ohio University Press is one of several premier university presses that publish African studies and or African history type texts. So my first piece of advice when thinking about the genre of writing a book proposal is to do your homework. And that means go to the press website, um, or if you still have one of the traditional paper copies, and you look at the subject area of where they publish and read the descriptions of the various series that they offer. Not all presses will have African Studies series, and certainly if they don't, that might not be where you want to publish. But for instance, if you're interested in Ohio, you're going to look and say, okay, there's 4 or 5 options. This is the one that best suits me. So then what you can do is there's usually a link that you can click on that will say instructions of how to write a book proposal. And there might be a template there for you to follow. It might have a specific format, or it might just say include a letter of interest along with your CV and a writing sample. I think it's more helpful when presses actually give you a template to follow, because then you're sure not to miss anything. But in the case that you're looking to publish with a press that doesn't have those specific guidelines, the most important things to include are certainly a cover letter, which can either be the proposal itself, or maybe a one-page cover introducing yourself and your work, and then a more extensive proposal. You're going to want to talk to the editors in a persuasive manner. We're not expecting you to say that yours is the very first book ever invented about XYZ topic, or it's the best thing ever written, because everybody will want to say that. Tell us what you're working on, the research that it's based on, which archival sources or ethnographic sources or data sets that you're working with. Tell us your major arguments and your major conclusions, as well as why it's important, the significance of your work. And your work might have significance in multiple frames. So it might be empirically significant. Maybe it is the first book to look at, market relations in a particular area or something like that. That's fine, but it also should advance theoretical knowledge as well. Even if you're might still think about, how does my research help us understand these other processes, either within Nigeria, within Africa, or the world more generally. And so, certainly thinking about the significance of your work is also something that you're going to want to pass along to the editors. You're also going to want to give the editors a sense of the size and the scope of the book. So at Ohio right now, we're looking for books that are between 80,000 and 100,000 words. And so that might divide into maybe about 5 chapters. It kind of just depends on how you write. It might be more if they're shorter chapters, but you're going to want to tell us how long your book is. And then we can also say, well, your book is now 120,000 words. We can only publish it if you shorten it. You're also going to want to give us a sense of what the chapter outline looks like. What are the main components of the book? So yeah, if you could give us an annotated table of contents, even with just a brief few sentences, a paragraph max, about what each chapter is about, that would be very helpful. And then remember that the introduction, if you are working on revising a dissertation, we might talk about that later, but the introduction is really where you're spelling out your major arguments. So make sure that that is very, very clear in the proposal. A couple other things I would just make sure that you add. We're looking to know who are who is your book in conversation with? Who are the competing authors? And so most presses will ask you what other work is like yours that's out there. The first instinct might say nobody. Mine is the first, mine is the best. There's nothing like it out there. And that might be a big mistake. You're going to want to make sure that you don't say that yours is the only book like this, because otherwise we're not going to want to publish it, because we want to make sure that it fits within a genre of scholarship that people can engage in conversations with. We won't be able to find a reviewer if nobody's ever written a book about this before. And so you could say, you know, when you're thinking about competing texts, you might talk about something that is similar, and you can talk about the similarities as well as the differences, but it's never a good idea to ignore this section or to say that no one has written any competing texts. And it's okay. You should probably be able to list at least 5 or 6 competing texts that at least think of your work in conversation. You're not going to want to undersell yourself and say that, you know, because these books exist, there's no reason for mine. Of course not. But you're going to want to say that my book would join this well-respected body of literature and move the field forward. And then I guess the last thing I would say just in this initial part is that you're going to want to give the editors a sense of your timeline. Where are you in the revision process? If you have just finished your dissertation, we don't want to see your proposal. We don't want your book, because a dissertation is not the same as a book. And I suspect we'll talk about that in a little while. But for those of you who are not familiar, there's a number of books that are very useful. William Germano has a book that's called From Dissertation to Book. That is the book that I would check out, among others, to think about the differences between a dissertation and a book. But when you're talking to the editors about where your timeline is, you're going to want to at least, I would say, I don't want to see anything unless it's been at least a year since you graduated with your PhD. It's going to take you at least a year to let the work marinate. Yeah. And then, you know, think about the deep revisions. And I think, you know, I'm assuming later we will talk about some of the differences, but in that timeline, give us a sense of where you're at. And most editors have a queue of books that they're in the pipeline. And so if you say, you know, I'm interested in your series, it's probably going to take me about, you know, a year and a half or so. That's great. We're going to add you to our spreadsheet if we're excited about you. And then we're going to follow up with you probably every 6 months to a year and say, how's it going? Are you, you know, let us know what, you know, are you still interested in us, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's not a disadvantage to say that you're still at the early stages, but don't expect us to want to receive anything until it's been thoroughly revised. I'll stop for now here and turn it over to Jackie.
Thank you so much, BT and Alicia and LSA for hosting what I strongly believe is a very important workshop. Because when I went through the process of publishing my first book, I remember there was a lot of confusion, and it was senior scholars and mentors who pulled me aside and helped me go through the process. And in many ways, they went above and beyond. And so I was able to see the behind the scenes and was able to see things that I should not repeat, things that I should look out for and do better the second time around. So Dr. Decker provided a really nice overview of what to look for in a book or a manuscript proposal. So I wanted to add more details. So a little bit about myself. I teach at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, located in the US, and I'm a co-editor for a book series by the University of Wisconsin-Madison Press titled Women and Gender in Africa. And so my co-editor is not here today, and so there are 2 of us. And so as you can tell by the title of the series, we are specifically looking for works that focus on women and gender in Africa. And we have a flyer, which I can share with the LSA officials, so you can get a better look at what we are looking for. And so when you're looking for, when you're working in your book manuscript or your book proposal, one thing to be thinking about is the publishing press that you want to submit it to. What are they looking for? Is it a good fit? So if someone comes to us and they're working on a work on economy and anthropology and linguistics, and we will probably say no because we will be looking for the women. We will be looking for issues of gender in there. And so if someone comes to us and they're saying, really recently, actually, someone, I was speaking to someone, and you're working on, let's say, gender and mobility in Equatorial Guinea. Yes, we are interested. Let's have a conversation because it fits in line with the mission and aim of our book series. Now, before I continue on, I did want to add a couple of things that are not advertised or talked about unless you have a mentor who pulls you to the side and they sort of whisper in your ears. The first thing is when you're a first-time author and you're a junior scholar, it can be hard. It can be difficult to get presses to take you seriously, to take your work seriously, unless you have, let's say, a senior scholar or a mentor who can, in many ways help you to facilitate that process. Or in my case, you find an acquisition editor or an editor of a book series who's invested in you from the very beginning. And I can only tell you my experience because everyone's experience is different. But for me, as a first-time author, I didn't even know what a manuscript proposal was. So I made meetings with book editors and they asked me for a manuscript proposal. And I said, what? And they realized, okay. And so one editor actually sat down with me and talked with me through the process. And this is the person who's my co-editor today for this book series. So she sat down and said, first, you need a manuscript proposal, but since we're not there, I want you to start with a précis. What is your dissertation about? What's the main argument? And so she said, I want you to go back and think these things through. And and also your work is on Cameroon. In Cameroon, we think our history is important. But outside of Cameroon, there are lots of people who are asking, where's Cameroon? What is going on? Is there a coup there? Like, why is your work important? And so for her, when she was speaking to me, she said, I know Cameroon is important, but anyone outside of that field is not really going to care. Why is your work important? What and so one of the things I urge and encourage junior scholars to think about is, okay, it's particularly if you're focusing on, let's say, Nigeria. How is your work important outside of Nigeria? What are the new methods, the new theories? So I had to really take a step back. And like Dr. Decker was saying, you really need to take a year away from your dissertation, if you can. Not everyone can. I took a year and a half away. Don't recommend that. A year is good. And it allowed me to think through the bigger so what. And the bigger so what of my project was not Cameroon. I'm sorry to say that. The biggest so what was the political aspect of my project. It was the separatist and secessionist movements that I was analyzing and the issues of gender that played in those movements. That was what was important. That was the big so what. And Cameroon became a case study. And by doing that, now I have people that focus on issues of gender and politics in Bolivia, in China, and they say, what I got from your work with these issues of politics and gender in Cameroon is a case study, and allowed me to think, how can Bolivia become a case study? How can China become a case study? I hope I'm making sense to some people in the audience. Usually when I'm teaching, I can see the whole audience. I can see my students nodding. So I can't really see everyone. And I hope I have everyone on the same page. And this is why I encourage junior scholars to think beyond your country of focus. Is it the issues of gender? Is it issues of politics? Is it theory? Is it methods that is really important and that is unique in your work? And someone can come along and pick that up. I don't have the book here, but recently I was a chair of a book prize committee, and there was a book that did not win the award, but it was the methods that was fascinating about it that I will replicate in my second book project. And it was just so interesting. And the whole committee was thinking, wow, the way the person put together the book is fascinating. And that's what drove the book. And for me, it wasn't so much the content, it was how the work was organized that inspired me so much to replicate that same organization, that same method for my second book project. And the content of the book in the 1500s about slavery in South America, which has nothing to do with my book, but it was the method, it was the way that was organized that made the book unique, that inspired the committee members. And so I'm encouraging everyone to sort of step away and think about the big so what that is important that you will need to emphasize in your manuscript proposal. And as a junior scholar, as a first-time author, I always find it, and it's not always possible, but I find it really important to find an editor who's invested in you. Because once they're invested in your work and in you, sometimes you don't go through the same process as everyone else. I remember the editor that I spoke to, and this is why you need to have a meeting with the editor, because not all editors are like that. I'm like that because that's the process I went through. So if I'm invested in a junior scholar professionally, personally, let's say when your book goes under review and you have 3 reviewers, and we can talk about this later on, but you need a certain number of strong reviews. But let's say you get mediocre reviews for all 3. And if I'm invested in you, I will help you get beyond that. And then we possibly will have to send it out for review again, which is not normal, but gives you another chance again, because I'm already invested in you and in your work. And I think that's really important for junior scholars to find editors who are invested in them. This is not always the case. This doesn't mean you will not do well if you find an editor that's like, submit the book, and we'll go through the whole process in the normal way. But I always try to encourage junior scholars, look at the Q&A. Sorry, I'm not sure why I said.
There's the question
Is that
about
you,
what's the
Alicia?
so what? What does that mean when you say what is the so what?
Oh, okay. So when I say the so what, why is your work important? Why should we care? And it has to be a good reason. For me, saying that Cameroonian history is important was not a good enough reason for what my so what is. So when I say the so what, it's really, what's the significance? What's the importance of your work that even someone who's not a specialist in your field will care about? So to get to the so what, you need to step away from your work for a bit of time and to look at it in the broader sense. For me, it was the most difficult because as a student, you're told to really focus on your research. And my so what was to literally step away and to ask myself. I actually had conversations with students, and I said to them, this is what my book is. Would you be interested? And many of them said, no, sounds boring. And so when I went through and thought of it and thought of how can I attract people to the book and want to read the book. And by the end, when my 2 sentences, when my students said, oh, yes, I would read that book, I realized I have the so what to the importance of the book. I had more to say, but I'll stop there. Professor Willis wanted to move forward.
So I didn't want to interrupt your flow. So if there's a few other things you wanted to, it's just we have I think Professor Samuel Olorotum, Olorun Toba Oju, who's also here, who's joining the panel. So he'll
Okay.
but go ahead and finish what
So
you want to say
one other
first.
thing I wanted to add, which is so easy, but does a lot of people do not do. Find other real book manuscript examples and replicate them. Find other real good ones, not weak ones, good, excellent ones. Find authors whose books are good and email them and say, you may not know me, but I'm trying to publish. Can I see your book proposal or your book manuscript, please? That's what I did.
Thank you so much. Oh, this is such a rich conversation. Professor Samuel, would you also like to offer some comments as well? Professor Decker and Professor Jacqueline have just introduced and highlighted a range of elements of the proposal in their response to the question, what a book proposal is, what it does. What would you like to add to this conversation?
All right, thank you very much. I would like to talk about my book series. I wish we can show it up there. I'm the series editor for Anthem Impact on indigenous knowledge and sustainable development. This is part of the project that I'm currently working on in Africa on indigenous knowledge and entrepreneurship across about 8 countries on the continent. So this book series provide a platform for emerging scholars, young scholars to publish very short monograph of about 30,000 words actually, which I think make it attractive. Enterprise is based in London, New York, Australia, thereabout. So the focus of the book edition is about indigenous knowledge, different aspects of indigenous knowledge, about how indigenous knowledge in Africa affect climate change, food security, environment, and all of that. In terms of the structure of the book, it's basically follow the usual, some of the things that we have talked about, that the other people have talked about. You need to have an introduction. You need to have, chapter layout. You need to talk about the competition in the field. Like Jacqueline said, nothing is new. When you say that your book is the first in the series, nobody has talked about it, that may not be attractive to the editors to look at. So we also need to suggest reviewers. You need to look at reviewers, possible reviewers. You need to talk about the discipline that we use the book. Like I said, the interesting thing about this book series is the fact that it provides opportunity for people who cannot write 100,000 words book, but 30,000 to 40,000 words. That is what we are looking at. The turnaround period usually like 18 months to 2 years. When you submit the manuscript, it has to go through the usual peer review process. Sometimes we can ask you to suggest possible reviewers, and then we'll send them out for review. And when they come back, you are expected to do the correction. Depending on the level of the correction, that determines how long it will take. And then when it comes, the production process begins. That takes a couple of times. You do copy editing and all of that. And then the sales, and we also offer some royalty. But of course, as academics, that's not the main objective. The main objective is to see that you have that opportunity to publish your first book. I can still think about how happy I was when I got my first book published some 8 years ago. So I think it's a good opportunity for people to take advantage of. Maybe I should stop here.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much, Prof. Thank you. Thank you so much. So another point, a kind of new point that we haven't quite touched on that you raised is the timeline, right? Timeline in terms of from the moment of submission of the manuscript to the publication date. Would others like to chime in or add other details about a kind of typical timeline and other elements of the kind of stages of that process that writers should expect? Also, people can.
No.
No.
Okay.
Okay, good. Okay. And also the issue of, or the elements of readers' reports.
Sure.
What to expect, how to process them as a writer, and move forward. So feel free, Jacqueline, Alicia.
Oh, yeah, I'm happy to jump in first. So I think one of the points that Jacqueline made that was really crucial is that if you can form a relationship with an acquisitions editor or a series editor, this is really, really golden, and you should not undervalue how important this relationship is. And so, for example, for our series, War and Militarism in African History, I work with a number of authors who I'm excited about, but their work isn't quite ready to go through peer review. And so I can think of probably 3 or 4 people that I've read several versions of their manuscript. And so this is part of the conversation about timeline, right? And so let's say you're coming straight from your dissertation, and I want to get a sense of what your dissertation is about, but I know it's not, it's not ready yet. I might read a version of it and then ask you to revise it again, send it back to me in 6 months to a year. I'll read it again. If I don't think it will pass peer review, I will not push it forward. and I don't know if other editors feel this way, but the timeline is basically contingent on the quality of what you send us. So if I'm excited about the project, but it still needs work, I'm going to send it back to you. And I'm going to say, let's try again in 6 months. Now, I want you to really take those 6 months seriously, because if you keep wasting my time reading stuff that has not been thoroughly kind of digested, then I'm getting frustrated. But this point about having a relationship, there's a number of scholars that I work with that they're diamonds in the rough, and I know they're going to have award-winning books. And so, you know, we've been working together for a couple of years. Now, finally, this author sends me a version that I finally think, yes, this is it. Okay, clock starts today. Got this manuscript, and actually I do have a manuscript like that right now. I've gone back and forth with this author for several years, and it's finally at a point where I think it's going to go through. So I will then look at the potential reviewer list that author has provided me. Also, authors can also say if there's any authors reviewers that they don't want. Maybe, you know, they burned some bridges with somebody, or maybe they did a close project with somebody who therefore would have a conflict of interest. So you can't ask that person. So I might see who they think would be good reviewers, and then myself and my co-editor will also think about who we think would be good reviewers. We send out some emails to these potential reviewers and say, hey, we have this manuscript that we're really excited about. Would you be able to take a look? Now, sometimes some presses are able to offer monetary compensation or give you, you know, credit and books and stuff for that labor. It just kind of depends. We give authors or reviewers 3 months to read a manuscript and to send us a reader report. I'll talk about the reader report in a minute. We expect that usually at least one of the reviewers will ask for an extension of at least another month. So you can expect that when the press has agreed to send your manuscript out for peer review, it's probably going to be 3 to 4 months before you hear anything. You should also know, and this is really, really crucial, if a press agrees to send your work out for peer review, you must not shop around that manuscript to other press at this point. So let's say I say, yep, okay, Professor Willis, I'm interested in your book. I'm going to send it out to reviewers. Ohio is now potentially paying these reviewers to look at your work. I'm going to be really annoyed if I find out that you've now sent your manuscript also to Professor Mugwe. That's not okay. So once I say I'm gonna invest in you, I'm gonna take a chance, then you're committed to Ohio, my press, until I either say we're not interested anymore or not. So you're allowed to send your proposal out to multiple presses, but once the press says we're going to send it out for peer review, unless they give you explicit permission, you need to make sure that you only let that press review it. So 4 months go by, we start getting the reader reports. Let's say we get 2 positive reports and 1 negative report, and the 2 positives are excellent. And the negative one is not that big of a deal. Then we'll probably share those reports with the author and say, you know, things are looking good. I want you to take these 3 reviews or reports into consideration, and I want you to write us a letter talking about how you plan to revise your manuscript based on the feedback you've gotten. And as editors, we're probably going to give you some signals about which of the comments we think are most important to address. So we might say that third person who wrote that review that was really negative, we actually don't really agree with them. So you can kind of acknowledge their comments, but you can disagree with them. Or, you know, you need to be professional in how you do this. But we as editors will kind of guide you in terms of what we think are the most important things to consider as you're writing your reviewer report response. And that response letter might be a page, 2-3 pages, something like that. But it's basically you showing that you've read through all the depending on how significant the revisions are, It might take you another month, 2 months, 3 months to make those revisions. That's really up to you as an author. Before I go to the next stage of the process, I just want to go back and say, if one of the reader reports is positive and one is negative, or two are negative and one is positive, as Professor Mugwe said, you know, if we believe in the project, we might encourage you to do a little bit more revision and then send it out to another reviewer. So all of this can add, you know, every time we ask somebody else to review it, we're going to add another 3 months to the process. If it comes back, all 3 reviewers say, this is a terrible project, it's plagiarized, it's problematic, it's whatever, then we'll say thanks, but no thanks. But in general, I think series editors, you know, we've combed through your work so carefully that we're not going to send it out until we think it's going to go through. So let's say everybody's happy, you write your report, your response, and you say, okay, editors, this is what I'm going to do. Then we take that letter that you have written to us. We will also, as editors, write an additional letter talking about why we are encouraging publication. And so there's these 2 letters, along with the initial reviewer reports and the manuscript, that we will then give to the editor-in-chief of Ohio University Press, in my case, to present to the board, the press's board. And they meet, it's either 3 or 4 times a year. And so then this editor-in-chief will go with a handful of projects that he's excited about moving forward, and then the board will decide whether or not to offer a contract. And Ohio doesn't do pre-contracts usually. Sometimes they do, but they don't really have any teeth to them. And so if the board agrees that there should be a contract awarded, then we come back to you. Congratulations, you're under contract. And then from that point, it's about another year to 18 months of production. And so the book publishing process, at least within the United States, can be very lengthy. But you know, we can speed it up if you're responding to our various emails along the way quickly. So for instance, you know, when we send you page proofs, you're going to need to go through and you're going to need to correct things. You're going to need to get the corrected manuscript back to us in a timely manner. You're going to need to fill out an author survey, which is about 10 pages long, that talks about how we might promote your work. What are your, you know, do you have permission to publish XYZ images? If you haven't started to get permission to use images in your text, you should start, because that can take 6 months. So in the best case scenario, once we give you the contract, a year to 18 months is when your book will be out in your hand, ready to go. Maybe a little bit faster, but it could also be significantly longer if there are delays along any of the way. I'm going to stop there and pass it on to my colleagues and then fill in the gaps of what I've probably missed.
Yeah, okay, you want to jump in?
So I did want to add a few things about how to respond to reviewers. This one is really important. It can be good, traumatizing. There are methods dealing with it. And it's always good to speak to different people, and not to speak to one mentor, one senior scholar and say, okay, that's the way to do it. The best way is to speak to several people, maybe 3, so that way there is a tiebreaker. And one of the advice that was given to me, how to respond to reviewers, is read every single word, every single line. It can be scary. It can be, your heart will be pounding, but you need to read every single thing once. Scholars are not professionals at writing reviews. So sometimes they can just sort of write things all over the place. Sometimes the tone is good. Sometimes the tone is mean. Sometimes the tone is nice when they're writing it, but when you read it as being mean. So, but you still have to read every single word. And one advice I have for those ones that you might read the review, you might cry. You might be upset. You might be sad. You might be frustrated. You might be angry. You read every single line one time and you read it well and you read it fine. And then you rewrite it in your own voice where it's nicer. Then you put the original one away, never to see again, unless you want to double check what they have said. But you rewrite it in your own way and you make sure you have rewritten in a way in which it conveys what they have said, but you write in your own voice. I have done this. I've had reviewers who were very mean, but I read every single line, cry, put everything away, and I don't have to keep crying every time I read their reviews as I am revising. So there's different ways in which you do it, but you must read every single thing because some presses, that mean review, the editors might actually agree with it. You need to respond because then when they take your book and they're looking to which of the 3 reviewers should we send it to, oftentimes it will be the person who is the harshest reviewer. So if you just took their review and just threw it away and then they sent it back to them, that's it for you. So this is why you have to read every single thing. And sometimes, as I said, reviewers or scholars, unfortunately, no one went through a class to how to write a review. Because even if it's coming away in which it's bothering you, a lot of times it's still really important. Sometimes, a lot of times it's still really, really important. And I would say my book or things or the articles that ended up in my book, there were a couple of really mean reviews that dramatically changed the book in a medically positive and important way. And if I didn't pay attention to it, it would not have been good for me. And that's why I say for reviews, you have to find a way of dealing with it, but also understanding that read every single line. And even if it's not important for the book, it might be important for a future book project or an article. And so that's the one thing I want to say about reviews. And then the second thing I want to say is reviews can be overwhelming because is take all of your reviews, usually it's 2 or 3, and look at it and say, what do they say about the introduction? Look at all 3 of those reviews. Take everything that they have said about the introduction, put it in one file, keep track of who said what. What have they said about the organization, the structure? Take all of that, put it in one file, and keep track of who said what. What have they said about the conclusion? Take all the advice, put that in one file. I hope I have everyone still.
Yeah.
I too have gone through my trauma of writing.
Yeah.
So then you take everything, put it on one file. Take everything, put it on one file. What did they say about the introduction? What did all 2 or 3 say about the makeup of or the organization? What did they say about conclusion? What did they say about how you even reference? Do you have the right page numbers? Are you using the Kindle version and the person is checking up? This is my son's book, but they're looking through and they're saying it's not on page 4. You need to keep track of all that. And then at the end, for anything that's random and that doesn't fit, put it in a miscellaneous file. And then keep going back to it. Keep going back to it to remind yourself of that, of what is happening. Now, one thing that I do want to add, this is overall in the revising process, and I don't know if we're going to get to it, is to remember that there are going to be many, many, many drafts. If you only have revised your manuscript proposal once, it's not good enough. You need to revise it multiple times, and you need to share it with various. Share the proposal with people, specialists in your field. Don't ask too many people because there's too many cooks in the kitchen. You don't want 30 people. Ask one senior scholar who's in your field, maybe 2, or and ask for levels. And then ask if in writing and publishing, some people their aim is they want to speak to different people. Some people want to only speak to 2 or 3 people in their field. If you're like me, you want to speak to different people. I asked a graduate student and undergraduate student to read my proposal and to say, is the language accessible? Do you understand it? Would you be interested? because I want it to be accessible. That's my goal in researching and publishing. If it's not accessible, at least to someone who is in the last year of high school or secondary school, if they can't read my book.
Like, oh, so
Hi, Katie. Hello, hello. Hope you're eating some good food. I'm on the track.
we're back.
So moving forward.
Such as something that I was told when I was writing my own book, right? And that is, you don't want the same critique that was ended up in your reader report to come out in a published review of your work. So, right, because again, once you hit send, right, it's out there, right? And you're gonna even see the mistakes, and sometimes you'll cringe, right, with a typo here or there, right? But you don't want something that you had the opportunity to correct, to address, right, to lean into, and to just dismiss it, because the chances are someone tasked against you. So, it's not out of fear, but out of actually respect for the profession and respect for, people, time and energy, right? And for the audience that you want to engage, that you want to share your work with an audience, knowing that you're giving them the best of what you had to offer on the topic, right? And that's just out of respect to them. It's out of respect to all the people who poured, countless hours and years into your work, into you, into supporting you, and into believing in your project, even at moments when it was not in full bloom, when it was just in its infancy. So that's just something I wanted to say. Professor Olorun Toba Oju, is anything you wanted to add?
Well, I think we've covered pretty much, but just to highlight that the series that I'm editing is a new one, and people are invited to click on the link and to submit their manuscript.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Such an important series um, as well. Okay, there's another point that I wanted us to come back to. And there was a question you had raised, Alicia, about um, what makes a dissertation different from a book. Maybe is that what we want to take the time to address in the last, what do we have, about another 15 minutes or so left in this panel? Um, so yeah, how about we come back to that? 'Cause that's something you raised early on. That's an important distinction.
Sure. I'll take a first stab at this again. Revision, revision, revision. This is the crucial word. If you walk away from this panel with anything, remember revision is your friend, your enemy, but very, very important. And so your dissertation, you're writing for your committee members. You're writing it for 3 to 5 people. Who are the people who are going to decide if you are worthy of being a doctor now? Whereas a book, you're writing it for all first-year university students or all scholars of Africa or everybody who's going to attend the Lego Studies Association meeting, whatever. It's a much broader audience. And so what you have to do is you have to change your framing. And so for your dissertation, you're trying to prove that you're an expert. You're using 1,001 footnotes. You're constantly citing every single expert. Every single sentence has a footnote. Every single sentence is justified by XYZ studies. You're proving yourself. You know the material. Whereas when you're writing a book, you've already proven yourself. You are now ostensibly a doctor. And so the audience who is reading your book is going to assume that you have done some of this work. It's not to suggest that you're still not using footnotes and citations, because you are, but you're going to radically, probably, I'm going to assume, cut down on the number of citations. Your tone is also going to be different. You're going to be able to speak in a much more persuasive manner versus kind of a pleading, believe me manner. I found that once I was writing my book versus my dissertation, And you can look at both of them. My dissertation is available online. My book is available online. You can see the difference. They're both about the same general thing, but they're night and day different. I cringe when I look at my dissertation because it's so narrow. It just feels very weak. So in addition to thinking about how do I change my language, for example, in the introduction to a dissertation, you have a literature review. You're not going to have a literature review in a book. Yes, you're going to be talking to the work of other scholars, but you're not going to be calling it a literature review. And so your entire tone is changing. I would suggest looking at the introduction to some of the books that you really know and respect, not only figuring out where they're published, because that might be a good place for you to look, but also how, as Jackie said, do they set the scene? How are they kind of getting you into this book? When I wrote my book, I was able to take a little bit more creative license and really set the scene. So instead of just presenting facts, I was able to kind of use my creative side and think about the craft of writing more. I'm not a creative writer, but I certainly had to think about that. And so talking about, I work in Uganda, so talking about, you know, the sun rising over the equatorial horizon as the women began cooking the breakfast and da 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 da. And so, you know, it's not just telling you the facts about what the women did in the morning. It's allowing the reader to kind of feel like they're there. And so pay attention to what does the scenery look like? What does the smell look like? What does it taste like when you're, you know, first, you know, putting that bread to your lips or something? And so this idea that's not about the research per se, but it's about the product of making your book something that people want to invest their time in, that is a huge part. So I would say that these two main things at this point, is that you're gonna, instead of writing just for your dissertation committee, you're writing for a much broader audience. That's one thing. And as part of that, really kind of eliminating a lot of the footnotes and citations. And then the second thing is really to pay attention to the craft of writing, to tell a good story, to have a through line that brings the reader all from the beginning of the dissertation, I'm sorry, the book, all the way through the end. And so it's a different genre, but that is what I would say are the 2 or 3 pieces of advice. And again, I would strongly recommend that you look at William Germano's book, From Dissertation to Book. It's a very short book. I think it's probably 100 pages at the most, but gives probably far more useful advice than I'm giving in terms of, you know, steps that you can take. But Jackie, I don't know if you want to add on in terms of thinking about how you revised from your dissertation to book. And I think you did really a brilliant job because I've seen both versions. But maybe you want to speak to
It was
that.
a bit rocky. But the number one thing I would suggest is to try and attend From Dissertation to Book workshops. I am going to call out one of our virtual audience members who came here. She didn't realize, Halamat. Halamat is our virtual attendee, and she put together a dissertation to book workshop, and I spoke in one of their sessions, and I thought it was really helpful and really productive for students to get together and to bring in speakers and to bring in mentors that will speak about how do you turn a dissertation to a manuscript. And I too myself attended online and virtual workshops to better understand that process. But turning your book from dissertation to manuscript, the number one thing to remember is that there's a different purpose. Your dissertation is to prove to your committee that, yes, I know what I'm talking about. The press wants to make money. So if you bring them a boring book that only one people's gonna buy, I'm sorry, it may not work out. Their press is also thinking about money. So in revising your dissertation, think about how can you attract people to your book intellectually, even how it is organized. Even your tone. I remember someone telling me, find your writing voice. And I thought, what do you mean writing voice? I'm just trying to finish my dissertation in my book. Now you're trying to have me find this mysterious writing voice. And I did not find my writing voice until towards the end of revising my book. And I wrote it, and it went to the advisory board of the book series that I wanted to publish with. And they said, this is a good book, but the problem is how you speak and is so different from what we read in this book. And they said, you're very excited by life, and we read this book and we want to fall asleep. And then they said, we don't see you in this book. And they also said, we don't even know that this book was written by an African woman who's from Cameroon, who's writing about Anglophone Cameroonians, and she herself is Francophone. So they said, we don't even see yourself in this book. And so they told me they said the content's good, but we need to hear your voice. We need to see you as well, but not in a way in which the book is all about me, obviously. So I had to go through and find different ways in which to include my writing voice, to include the ways that perhaps may not be, when it comes to writing, it may not follow all of the writing laws, but my voice and my excitement or how I say things sarcastically came out here and there in the book. And so these are some of the differences when it comes to writing your dissertation and when it comes to the book, for the book, you need to think about the audience. Who do you want to read your book? So for me, it began from the very beginning. I want a high school senior to be able to read my book. And so with that sort of mission and aim, it really impacted even my language. If you see my book, I mean, there's very few times where I have fancy language. I shouldn't use the word fancy, theoretical, sort of high-reaching language, because it's not accessible to sort of the everyday literate person. And so these are different things to be thinking about when it comes to writing your book. Now, and these are different conversations you might have later on for your second or third book. There are scholars who say, you know what, I did the first book. My second book is now only for Cameroonians. And that's my audience. And how I even frame things is for them. But they take more license for the second book than the first one. So there's different things that shift as you go along in your career.
Can we just take a list of about 3 or 4 questions from the audience, and then just try to rapid fire response in the last few moments we have? Whether anybody in the room or somebody wants to type in the chat or in the Q&A. So audience, you feel like all your questions have been answered around process of preparing a proposal? Anything lingering? All right. Any last words then from my panelists, my fellow panelists here?
I would just say that if you are interested in publishing with one of our series, please feel free to reach out. We're easily found on the internet. You might also reach out to other editors from other presses, depending on the nature of your work, and just start a conversation. You might even just say, hey, I'm interested in sending a proposal. Is this an area that you might be interested in? So that way you don't have to write the whole 3, 4, 5-page proposal. You could just send a paragraph and I could say right away, nope, not interested in that. It's not about war. Don't want it. Or yes, I want to hear more. And so, do your homework, figure out what the press is about, figure out who the editors are, make contact, and don't burn any bridges. Don't burn any bridges, because years later, you may be coming back to us, or we might be coming across your work in different ways. That's all I have to say. Jackie?
I just wanted to echo what Professor Decker said, to reach out. I have here our flyer for Women and Gender in Africa series. And we have our contact information, or mine is right here, and my co-editor's contact information is here. So we always encourage potential authors to reach out, but a lot of people forget about the advisory board and what they can do for you. So look through the names of the people on the advisory board, because the co-editors or editors in general, if we get a manuscript, particularly one that may not be exactly in our field of our specialty, we will look to the board. And we will say, well, what do you think about this manuscript? And so I always encourage junior scholars or first-time authors, look through the advisory board and see, do you know anyone there? Might you reach out someone there who might help facilitate the process for you? If you are a historian, you have Nwando Chebi. Over here, we have Laura Ann Wajira. If you are a political scientist, we have Shireen Hassim. So look through the names and see, who do I know? And maybe let me connect with them. and perhaps they might mentor you. And so do not forget about the advisory board. And that's where I will end.
Well, what I'll just say that you need for consistency and focus in the process of writing the manuscript cannot be emphasized. That there's that tendency to go to scatter the thought around on different issues, but there must be a central thing around the manuscript. So I think that's the process of it.
Thank you so much, Prof. All right. Well, thank you all, the Legos, for joining this panel or for being part of this conversation. Thank you to my fellow panelists here for your time, insights, and expertise. Again, those in the audience, feel free to reach out to any of the individuals on the panel moving forward. And with that, we will end this session. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day in Lagos. And
Have a good afternoon.
Great conference. Ó dàbọ̀.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.